Hello and a very good evening to you. Britain has pledged £38 million in aid to Ethiopia to help address the threat of a famine. The UN has called for more international aid to be sent to Eastern Africa, where 10 million people are said to be affected by the worst drought to hit the Horn of Africa in decades. The International Development Secretary, Andrew Mitchell, said the money Britain was giving would feed more than 1 million Ethiopians for 3 months and stop a larger disaster developing. Mike Wooldridge reports.
Nuria arrives at the world's largest refugee camp with her 6 children, the family driven from Somalia by hunger. They're among more than 60,000 people who've crossed the border here into northern Kenya this year.
The main reason is drought. We don't have food. We had nothing to eat. People started to die, so we fled.
And the growing malnutrition among the children especially is all too evident at the Dadaab camp. Of the 10 million people now affected by drought across the region, close to 3 million are in conflict-ridden Somalia alone. Today, the UN has not only called for urgent action, but also challenged donor countries to put aside fears that in Somalia aid will fall into the hands of Islamist extremists or warlords. And Britain has announced funding for emergency food relief in Ethiopia.
The particular focus is to try and stop what is an emerging catastrophe taking place in the Horn of Africa, 2 years now, during which there has been no rains and a steady drought. And this specific intervention by Britain is designed to make sure that over the next 3 critical months we're able to feed 1.3 million people.
Moving livestock in search of pasture isn't necessarily giving them any greater chance of survival. Many animals have died, crops failed, and local cereal prices have shot up.
It should never happen. We should never be in a position where things get to the situation like it was in Somalia in 1992 or some of the awful Ethiopian famines of the past, because we know that things are happening now and we can provide food and we can provide assistance, and we need to be doing that very urgently.
And here in this part of Uganda, the crisis adds to notoriously chronic difficulties in overcoming malnutrition. Taken together, another severe test looming for an ever-growing number of families and for the international community. Mike Wooldridge, BBC News.
Ian Bray is from Oxfam and joins us from our Oxford studio now. Ian, a very good evening to you. I spoke to your colleague Alan MacDonald in Nairobi a short while ago. He was saying how the situation in the Horn of Africa is indeed growing more desperate day by day. Just give us a sense what Oxfam here is doing to help the situation.
Well, we're working in all the 3 major countries where the drought is having such a devastating effect: Somalia, Ethiopia and Kenya, and we've got plans ahead to reach 2.5 million people. The situation is extremely desperate. People are extremely hungry. Thousands upon thousands of their animals have died, and that's their bank accounts. That's what they rely on to keep themselves alive. And so what Oxfam will be doing is working much harder than we've been doing in the past, because we know we can save lives. The time now is for action. It's extremely urgent, and the world needs to respond to this as soon as possible so that a catastrophe doesn't turn into a disaster. Time is of the essence. We really do have to get aid to people to keep them alive.
What sort of aid will you be sending from the UK?
What we're doing here in the UK, of course, is getting all our teams together, and also we'll be calling on the public to give donations. You can donate on the Oxfam website, and all the other aid agencies in Britain as well are having their appeals as well. So the public can join us and help us in reaching the people who really need it so that we can save lives. And it is extremely urgent. People have been without rains for 2 years now. It's the driest in certain parts for the last 60 years. So the situation is extremely desperate, and we're seeing alarming malnutrition rates well above emergency levels.
Your colleague told me that Oxfam, I suppose along with other major aid agencies, has been appealing for months for major donations. Obviously, the UK is donating a substantial sum, but other countries have not yet stepped up to this. I mean, what more needs to be done to persuade governments that the situation is desperate and that they need to act right now?
Well, it's very welcome that the British government has given those funds to the World Food Programme for their work in Ethiopia. There is a very, very good UN system, a famine early warning system, which puts out all the data about rainfall, about the price of food going up. So the world knows that this was looming. They knew for months and months ago. But they're very, very slow at responding to these crises. And sadly, it is only when it is usually far too late for too many people that the world starts reacting to this. We can save lots of lives now, but we really have to start acting, and we welcome very much the British government's lead, and we want more governments now to be as generous as Britain has been in responding to this. It won't be just food that's needed. There'll also be need for clean water, because clean water is extremely important when people are extremely hungry and also facing disease.
But you're saying that the political will doesn't seem to be there to act until virtually the 11th hour.
That is always the case, and how many times have we seen situations like this in the Horn of Africa? Usually in the past it would be a major drought once every 7 years, and now we're seeing major droughts every other year now. So the world really has to address this immediate need, but also look to the longer term as well, and help these countries and help these communities be able to work their way out of these problems and be given the support that they need at the right time, not at the 11th hour.
So how do you change that pattern? If the pattern has been that governments don't respond in a timely enough fashion, how do you persuade them to do otherwise, to act earlier?
One would love to if it was just governments responding purely to rational arguments, but unfortunately they do not, and it's only when the emotional pictures that come out of Ethiopia, out of Somalia, out of Kenya, force them into action. And it would be marvellous if it was just they responded to all the warning signs coming from the UN, from the aid agencies. Sadly, that is not the way that politicians respond to these things, and it's only when it is the 11th hour, it isn't the 12th hour yet, it's the 11th hour, that politicians and governments and donors respond to these crises.
OK, Ian, well, we wish you luck with your operation there in the Horn of Africa. Ian Bray from Oxfam.